impossible is something that women feel very, very often as entrepreneurs. And so part of what we look to achieve is to help instill confidence in the women that come through our program, to let them know that, you know what, you do have a good idea, you do have the support, you do have the network that you need to be successful. And that's really what we're trying to do.
And I'm your host, Karen Swizik. This is the podcast where a bit of business and a bite of technology come together. Every month, I interview entrepreneurs, investors, startup founders, and people in tech to learn about what drives them and what makes them tick. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Bacon Bits and Bites podcast. And today with me, I have Nicole Troster. Nicole Troster has over 10 years experience developing startups and working with organizations to design policies and programs to support entrepreneurship. She currently manages Ella, an accelerator created by York University exclusively for women entrepreneurs. It provides unparalleled support and access to a community of founders, mentors, top experts, and supporters to help women scale their businesses. Welcome to the show, Nicole.
Thank you so much for having me, Karen. I'm so excited to chat with you today.
Likewise, and I'm really excited because I remember we didn't meet at the event, but I attended the Ella launch event. I think it was back in March to help support a fellow entrepreneur who is part of the cohort, and I just thought it was so inspiring and motivating to be surrounded by so many women entrepreneurs.
Oh, that's amazing that you were able to attend. And oh my goodness, so much has happened since then. It's a completely different world, it feels like.
All right, so let's dive right into it. So regarding your background, how did you get into supporting entrepreneurs? What was your career path like?
It's a really, really interesting question. And I think, going back to when I was a kid, my mom was actually an entrepreneur, and she owned her own motel for 34 years. So as a kid, I was really, really attuned to kind of what was going on in the business at home. So again, I was always kind of around business. And then when I eventually got into my career, I became a lobbyist on behalf of small and medium-sized businesses. And I did that for about 6 years, lobbying at different levels of government, lobbying for policies and regulations that would help to support entrepreneurs and small businesses. And I got recruited into the Ontario Public Service. I oversaw a project there where we were getting feedback directly from businesses about how to improve the regulatory environment and reduce business costs. And then I decided to make a change. I really wanted to work more directly with entrepreneurs. So I moved out to Waterloo. I did my master's of business entrepreneurship and technology. I was working on my own venture at that point. I was working with other startups and other organizations to help design policies, programs to help support entrepreneurship, and eventually came back to Toronto. Was managing a tech incubator at Ryerson. And then I got the opportunity to get involved with Ella. And I just said, you know what a great opportunity to support women entrepreneurs like my mother, who could really benefit from support. So I've been there ever since. I'm loving being able to help women firsthand and to be a part of their journey.
Amazing. So prior to Ella, I had actually never heard of a women entrepreneur-focused accelerator. I feel that the majority of them were focused on tech, but I think now I'm beginning to see more niche type accelerators.
Yeah, I think Ella's very, very unique in the sense that we don't just cater to tech entrepreneurs. We have a lot of service-based businesses in the cohort, and to the tune of 80%. Which is actually a reflection of women-led businesses in the economy. If you look at the types of businesses that women tend to own, there's a lot of retail in the economy. If you look at the types of businesses that women tend to own, there's a lot of retail, a lot of service-based businesses, wholesale businesses, healthcare businesses. So from that perspective, we're providing help to the average women-led business.
Mm-hmm. So you had mentioned that since the launch party, a lot has changed. So I would love for you to share all the initiatives that Ella has been doing thus far.
Yeah, as you mentioned, our launch party was on March 3rd. 10 days later, we were asked to basically pivot the whole program. So originally, all of the sessions, all of the programming was meant to be online and given through York Region Small Business Enterprise Centers. And we very, very quickly, like many of the businesses in our cohort, had to pivot to provide all of our programming online. So we had to rethink some of the programming. We had to rethink how we were going to engage this massive cohort of women and kind of help engage them in such a way. We had planned for 7 core workshops, but what we found was the idea that a lot of women were not doing business primarily online. So we brought in organizations like Shopify, Thinkific, for example, and others to help teach the women how to get online really, really, really quickly. So we ended up offering something like 18 workshops in total to help cater to the needs of the women at that specific time.
And I noticed there are also 2 specific programs that people can apply to through Ella, Ascend and Altitude. And I love those names, by the way. They're very powerful.
Oh, thank you so much. So Ella Ascend is all about scaling up your business, and Ella Altitude is all about going global. So once you've kind of scaled your business, how do you take it global? So the names really fit with what we're trying to achieve in the program.
Mm-hmm.
So the names really fit with what we're trying to achieve in the program.
Mm-hmm. So regarding how women approach entrepreneurship and run their businesses versus the way men approach entrepreneurship, how would you say women take their approach?
It's really, really interesting. I mean, the drivers behind starting a business are different than for men. Sometimes, when women have families, to accommodate their schedules and to provide for more flexibility, they tend to start up their own businesses. So that's one major difference. I think the inherent confidence that men have about their business, about their capabilities, about being able to raise capital for their companies is completely different than what women entrepreneurs feel. Imposter syndrome is something that women feel very, very often as entrepreneurs. And so part of what we look to achieve is to help instill confidence in the women that come through our program, to let them know that, you know what, you do have a good idea, you do have the support, you do have the network that you need to be successful. And that's really what we're trying to do.
Yeah, agreed. And I think, well, in general, I would say entrepreneurs, we constantly need support on every aspect of the journey because it's been long, difficult, and isolating. And we need that support even more so during these unprecedented times. So I was checking your LinkedIn profile, and you had mentioned that Ella got nominated for the 2020 Canada Innovation and Entrepreneurship Award in the COVID-19 Support Award category. So congrats on that. And then also, you recently held your first Ella Demo Day. So also congrats on that. Do you mind
Thank you.
sharing a little bit more detail about those 2?
Yeah. So the nomination came as a complete surprise. Obviously, a very, very, in terms of COVID, it's not just about managing the business and trying to find new channels to find customers because everything's kind of gone digital, but it's also managing families and managing other responsibilities at home and having to layer all of that on top of each other. So one of the things that we learned quickly, we could not have 3-hour workshops. We had to reduce the amount of time. So making sure we had really impactful workshops. One of the things that we also learned, which we've implemented for Altitude, is the idea of self-learning at a point in time when you have time to do things. So instead of having a workshop that starts and it goes from 10 to 11, being able to have recorded content that the women can learn from at their own pace and at their own time. If they've got kids at home, they might need to be able to do that later at night. So building flexibility into the program to make sure that the women can get what they need out of the program is absolutely paramount. And then in terms of demo day, again, when you think about the launch, you were there, so you saw what it was like in person. It's easier to kind of build those connections, which again, Ella's all about a sense of community. So having demo day completely online was very, very different than the launch. One of the things that we implemented, which was really, really fun, was what we like to call networking roulette. And that's just basically randomized networking with different participants. So you basically hit a button to say that you're ready, and then you randomly get matched with somebody. And you basically have a minute and a half to connect with that person, learn more about that person, and want to kind of connect afterwards, which was so much fun. And in terms of the 5 presenters that presented last night, I was just blown away by the quality of their pitches and so proud to be part, again, of their journey in entrepreneurship.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, it's also roulette. So it's really exciting to see like, oh, who am I going to get matched up with next?
Yeah, and some of the people I knew and have a close connection with, and others I didn't know as well. So it gave me an opportunity to kind of have chats with both of those types of people, which was great.
Mm-hmm. So based on your experience, that you had a parent who is an entrepreneur, and your education, you went for a master's in business entrepreneurship and technology, and now you're in a role where you support entrepreneurs. Have you ever considered becoming an entrepreneur yourself?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, when I was in Waterloo, I was working on my own venture. It was a social enterprise which looked to make corporate events more environmentally and socially sustainable. I went through all of the steps of startup development that you should go through. So doing customer interviews and customer discovery, steps of startup development that you should go through. So doing customer interviews and customer discovery and needs discovery and all of those things. And ultimately it came down to the point where the business as I had conceived of it, no matter how I pivoted it, was not going to be financially sustainable. So I had to make the hard decision to kind of close that business down. But entrepreneurship is not something that I have ruled out completely. I think, again, the opportunities to work more closely with startups came up. And, I love working with motivated founders. And I love seeing progress and just seeing those aha moments. And when they're integrating new things and they're successful. And, that's something that feels so good inside that I'd have a hard time kind of giving that up, even if I did do my own venture. But again, I think entrepreneurship is something that I'll dive back into at some point in time.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that because I've also noticed too, on my LinkedIn feed, seeing people who have either decided to go into entrepreneurship during the pandemic, or they were an entrepreneur, but they decided to go back into working a 9 to 5. And then some people are doing both, doing their startup on the side. So yeah, I definitely agree. There is no direct way, and people can easily like transition, I think, between the two paths. And given that we seem to have a lot more time during the pandemic, it's definitely a great path to explore, or it's a great opportunity to explore those ideas.
For sure. And I think if you look at most serial entrepreneurs, they kind of dabble in and out of it over the course of their whole lifetime, because there's something that's extremely addictive about entrepreneurship. And certainly it's not for everybody, but for those who have tried it, have been successful at it, love it, you know what I mean, kind of things. A contact sport, as you have personally said. It's not easy. If it was easy, everybody would do it. But again, there's something absolutely addictive about it. And having the opportunity to have an idea and do what it takes to bring it to fruition is absolutely amazing.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And I can definitely relate to having a hard time shutting down your business, because prior to working on my social venture, I was doing like a consulting and workshop business, but I personally felt that it wasn't sustainable. I couldn't see it grow, even though I knew there were options to take it completely online. There was just something in my gut that was telling me you need to move on. Most of your energy is being pulled toward your social venture, so you should focus on that.
And you know what? That's a really tough decision to make, like you're saying. And sometimes entrepreneurs don't know when enough is enough in terms of that. And sometimes they continue down sometimes entrepreneurs don't know when enough is enough in terms of that. And sometimes they continue down the path, even though the business is failing and there are sure signs that it's failing, they continue to do it. And I mean, I think that's where I really benefited from, the Waterloo ecosystem, from the education that I got around the startup cycle and what that looks like, because had I not been involved with that, I might have continued and dumped a lot more money and effort into building my business, even though it wasn't going to be successful at that time. I think it's just one of those business ideas that, especially where social procurement is concerned, it's just going to take a couple of years for people to really understand why they should be using social procurement.
Kind of adding on to the idea of ideas, this question may seem a bit vague, but what do you consider to be a good idea to start a business?
I think one thing, and this is something that I've heard time and time, people come up with what they think are great ideas, but at the end, it's either a product or service that nobody's going to use at the end. And, it's really unfortunate that that happens. But again, a good idea is one that solves an important problem.
Mm-hmm. And there's definitely a lot of problems that can be solved. And I think a lot of the times too, when people start their businesses, they're solving a problem for themselves. And then once they start the business and tell other people, they realize that other people are looking for that solution to the same problem.
Mm-hmm. And those are usually the companies that are the most successful. It's something that the entrepreneur has felt the pain of. And then they talk to other people and they, like you said, they realize that, oh my God, this is an actual thing. Like, I need to solve this problem. And those are the ones that are usually really, really successful. The ones that have a cool idea and they think about the problem after the fact and it never quite fits, those ones sometimes are a lot less successful.
Mm-hmm.
Those ones sometimes are a lot less successful.
Mm-hmm. And since you work with a lot of entrepreneurs, what characteristics would you say are representative of successful entrepreneurs?
It's really interesting because I think COVID-19 has highlighted some of those characteristics. I think probably number one is resilience. And tenacity is super, super important. And courage is also super, super important. I have a few entrepreneurs from the Ascend cohort that never cease to amaze me in their tenacity. They are fearless when it comes to trying things in terms of trying to promote their product or service, in trying to get eyeballs and attention. No matter what, I feel like those women are going to be successful because they have the qualities and the traits that are necessary for them to be successful.
And I know all the members of the cohorts are absolutely amazing, but are there any in particular that you would like to highlight during this episode? Are there any ones that we should be on the lookout for?
Oh my goodness. You're like asking me to pick one of my favorite children.
Well, I know they're all amazing, but if you're okay with just choosing a couple.
Yeah. So one of the first ones that comes to mind is a woman by the name of Tessa Thomas. She is the founder of an organization called Recruit HQ. It's a really, really cool platform that allows high school athletes to learn more about varsity athletics. So former varsity athletes can go on there, leave reviews about their experience in a specific university, and high school athletes and their families can learn more about what that looks like. And it's not just looking at the athletics side of that equation, but it's also looking at the school and the whole overall experience, which I think is absolutely incredible. Knowledge is power kind of thing. So I think this helps to empower high school athletes. Another really, really cool company that's in the cohort is called Shosha. And what they do is they have a vegan chocolate, which is made from something like 3 ingredients. And they used AI to kind of help them determine how to make this chocolate. A really, really interesting story because most of the chocolate that you see, even the really high-end chocolate, has at least something like 12 or 20 ingredients. But the fact that they're able to make something that's really, really pure, wholesome, and that has quite an actual interesting texture because of the way that it's made. They're using ancient production techniques from Peru to make the chocolate, which is really, really incredible. Again, there are so many incredible companies that it's not fair for me to only mention 2, but those are the 2 that definitely stick out. And not fair for me to only mention 2, but those are the 2 that definitely stick out, and 2 of the companies that presented last night.
Yeah, both of them sound really amazing. So I'm curious to know, how do you decide who gets into either of those cohorts? What do you think, or what would you say like helps entrepreneurs stand out?
That's a great question. So there's a committee that reviews all of the applications, and we've created criteria and a rubric for evaluation. But I think in terms of the things that really stand out, having a very clear picture of your business. So do they understand their value proposition? Do they understand who their target customer is and how to reach them? Do they understand what problem they're aiming to solve? Are they clear about how they're going to scale up the business? The clearer they're able to be about those things, the more they're going to get out of a program you're talking about. Somebody who's able to leverage everything that we're putting in front of them, the mentorship, the peer circles, the subject matter experts, the workshops, like everything that we provide you, it's got to be somebody who's going to take those things, learn as best they can, apply what they need to their business to grow. Like, it takes a special person to do all of those things.
Mm-hmm. And for someone, say they're interested in the program and they haven't reached that point of clarity yet, is there anything that you can suggest for them to do to help gain that clarity? Like, I know it sounds easier said than done, but I'm just wondering if you can advise them on, like, are there certain steps? Are there certain resources that they should look into?
That's a really great question. I think one thing that's always a sure tell sign for me is being able to articulate your value proposition,
Mm.
like your unique value proposition. If you're able to go to a group of potential like your unique value proposition, if you're able to go to a group of potential customers, or who, like the people who you think will buy your product or service, and articulate that value proposition clearly, and they're like, yep, we get it, we want to buy it, where do we sign up? Even if the product or service hasn't been fully developed, then that's usually a pretty good thing. Like, start working on your value proposition, start having conversations with potential customers to understand what is the problem, what are the current alternatives that they're using to solve the problem, and like, why are those alternatives not working yet? The most helpful things that you can do is to have conversations with the people who are affected by the problem, because they'll tell you so much of what you need to know.
That is really great advice. So listeners, take note. All right. So your position is very unique. Like, you're surrounded by a lot of entrepreneurs involved in the ecosystem. What advice would you give to someone who's looking for a role where they can support entrepreneurs? What advice would you give to someone who's looking for a role where they can support entrepreneurs, like something that is similar to yours? And what experience and education should they obtain?
That's such a hard question to answer, because when I look at the people that I know in the ecosystem, no two are alike. Everybody has a different path to entrepreneurship, in the same way that everybody has a different path to supporting entrepreneurs. I think just working with founders and having empathy for what they're going through, and much like you would treat your own business, getting at the heart of the problem that entrepreneurs face and helping to solve that problem in a meaningful way, just like you would in a business. I think those are really kind of the most important things. So if it's like volunteering with either an incubator or accelerator or boards of trade or small business enterprise centers, like, there's so many different ways to get involved with businesses from that perspective. Something that a lot of people wouldn't take the risk to do necessarily, especially for early stage startups. But you get to know the business inside and out if you're one of the early employees. And you play such a big role in helping to overcome so many challenges, because as we know, like, most companies fail within the first 5 years of their existence. So from that perspective, it's an education unto its own. Again, really, really hard question for me to answer.
No, you answered it really well. I just wanted to add to that because with my own experience, to be honest, I never anticipated I would be an entrepreneur. I honestly thought I would have the same path as my parents, working in the same industry or job for 25 to 30 years, collect your pension. And I was working for the government for a few years, but then I eventually left and joined a startup, and it was only a year and a half, but I felt I had learned so much, joined a startup, and it was only a year and a half, but I felt I had learned so much, gained so much experience. I really enjoyed being in that ecosystem. And I think that kind of helped light the entrepreneurial fire in me.
Mm-hmm. As a young person, I was able to work for Scale Up. At the time, I didn't even know what a Scale Up was, but I ended up working for Scale Up, and I worked for smaller organizations where you do get to wear a number of hats. And that was so much more interesting to me than wearing singular hats in larger organizations, just because you learn a ton. And I don't know, for me, like, lifelong learning is super, super important. And again, for people who are just starting their careers, like, working for a startup gives you a huge opportunity to learn so much and to create such a huge impact within the business.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's so important to try different things because or you don't. So sometimes you have to go through so many experiences or do so many things to figure out what you like and what you don't like. At least that's how I felt for me personally.
No, I totally agree with you.
All right. Looking back on your career path so far, was there anything that surprised you in particular?
I think probably the biggest thing that surprised me is how, with the position that I have at Ella, how my career kind of came full circle. I didn't necessarily understand when I went to Waterloo to work more closely with startups how my lobbying experience would serve me in a role like the one I have for Ella. Lobbying on behalf of small and medium-sized businesses, I learned a lot about the challenges that business face on, the external side. So, the type of impact that raising taxes or having more stringent regulations can have on the business, and internally more stringent regulations can have on the business. And internally, you're already dealing with so many different challenges, whether it be competition or trying to find talent or other things. So I think the lobbying experience helped me understand the outside of the organization. And then the Waterloo and the incubator experience has really helped me to understand the inside. So I think I have such a good perspective now that I wouldn't have had I done all those things.
Oh, interesting. If you could meet any entrepreneur, if you could have a Zoom call or, a socially distanced coffee with them, who would it be?
This is probably controversial, although I'm sure like a lot of people would say the same thing, like Elon Musk. One of my best friends bought a Tesla, and I'm a huge car buff, like huge. And it's funny because I used to dream of one day if I won the lottery, maybe I'll get a Ferrari, or maybe I'll get a Ferrari or something like that. And I sat in a Tesla and I was just blown away by how they redesigned every aspect of a car. Like, incredible. So being able to pick his brain and the way that he sees the world would be an absolutely incredible opportunity.
It's interesting. Like now that you mentioned it, I want to sit in a Tesla and be like, oh, so that's what Nicole was talking about. You know what? It's funny because I ask this question quite often on my podcast interviews, and a lot of people have mentioned Elon Musk, and I myself too would love to meet him and just, ask him all these questions like how he did it, how he stayed motivated, just trying to absorb as much knowledge as I can from him.
Mm-hmm. I can totally see it. I mean, like when you look at how many industries he's working in and how he's really disrupting for like one of the things that I'm really fascinated by is this whole concept of Hyperloop. And having lived out in Waterloo and seeing how disconnected the transportation systems are, but in the corridor, having something like a Hyperloop would really help to increase innovation within Ontario, within the country, within the corridor. It would also help to like connect people, to give people opportunities to kind of work in Waterloo, for example, with all of these really, really innovative companies. Like it would just lead to a wealth of opportunity if we had something like a Hyperloop.
For those of the listeners out there who aren't familiar with the term Hyperloop, could you explain it?
I will try and explain it the best way I can. It's like faster than a high-speed train. It's like a pod that travels in a tunnel underground at an incredibly high rate to help move passengers from point A to point B faster than we humanly know on Earth. Passengers from point A to point B faster than we humanly know on Earth right now.
Oh, that does sound very interesting. And yeah, that definitely would be beneficial because I think We're now doing a lot of remote work, but when it gets to the point where people are more comfortable of traveling and having in-person meetings, the Hyperloop would definitely be beneficial because commute time is always a huge obstacle when you're trying to get to meetings or even just get to your job on a daily basis. Oh, sorry, daily basis and weekly basis.
For sure. And certainly like automated cars, when they become fully autonomous, would help that as well, because again, people can focus on other things during their car ride. But I do take the point that you mentioned that, I think remote work is here to stay.
Mm-hmm. So with respect to Ella, what's on tap for the remainder of the year?
Later this year, we'll also start planning for Ascend 2021. And we're looking at, again, additional supports for service-based companies because they do make up such a big proportion of women-led businesses. So stay tuned on that. We'll definitely share more details when they become available.
And for people who are looking to support Ella, what are some ways that they can provide their support?
Great question. So we've got lots of different ways. We're always looking for mentors, for example, who have started up successful companies and want to give back to the community by mentoring a women-led business. We have subject matter experts, for example, people who have really, really deep industry experience or startup experience that, maybe they can't spend as much time mentoring, but they want to have a conversation to help an entrepreneur kind of get unstuck or learn more about a specific sector. They can volunteer their time with us that way, or just being part of the community and helping us to kind of cheerlead what we're doing, signing up for our newsletter, keeping up to date on everything that we're doing to find out about other opportunities to be involved, spreading the word, raising awareness about the fact that these programs exist. And, if there are any women in their lives that need support from a program like Ella, putting them in touch with us to make sure that they know about us and vice versa.
And if people wanted to know more and stay in touch aside from the newsletter, where can we find Ella online?
We're at www.ellawomen.com. We have our website, has all the information up there, or they can reach out to me on LinkedIn.
Amazing. Thank you so much for joining me on the show today. I had a really great time chatting with you and learning more about how you support women entrepreneurs.
Thank you so much, Karen, and thanks for the opportunity to speak with you and, so inspired by the fact that you're moving your own dial.
Thanks everyone for tuning in and stay tuned for more episodes. Ciao for now. Thank you again for taking the time to listen to the podcast. I would love it if you could subscribe. Thank you again for taking the time to listen to the podcast. I would love it if you could subscribe, leave a review on iTunes, and share this podcast with your family and friends. You can follow the podcast on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn at Bacon Bits and Bites. That's bites with a Y. And on Twitter, it's baconbits_bites. Ciao for now.